Hi everyone, welcome back to Wine for Life. I'm Michael Lee and my guest today is someone who I respect greatly in the wine industry. His name's Niki Moser from Weingut Sepp Moser. I've known Niki for some time now, and not only is he a leading practitioner of biodynamic winemaking, which we will get deeply into in today's conversation, but I think much more important than this is just the authenticity and genuine care he has for his vineyards, his family, and of course his customers. And I think the ripple effect of this and his philosophy on wine goes way beyond the cellar. As even though his wines are really delicious, I think it's just the way they make you feel which has a lasting effect on your experience. So, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Niki and how with wine and life, it really is all connected. Niki, welcome to the podcast today. It's great to finally have the chance to sit down and have a chat with you about all things wine and a little bit about your background, your life in wine. Thanks for being here.
Hello, thank you.
Pleasure. Actually, I thought maybe what would be a good place to start is how you would, in a few minutes, describe your sort of family history. I mean, it's we're going to get into it as we sort of discuss, but I mean, just really to sort of in a nutshell, where the Moser family name in wine has sort of originated from and you know, to this point in time.
As far as I know, our family we are here in that area for many centuries. And as far as I know, we're connected with wine for 17 generations. The new situation was coming with the year 1884, when there was the liberation of the farmers. And my grandfather started his own winery in 1849. So this was Mr. Anton Moser, and I think the most famous guy of my ancestors was certainly my grandfather, Mr. Lenz Moser, who was the inventor of the high training system of the vine in the 50s.
Yeah.
He began earlier than that, but it was becoming more popular in the 50s and 60s of the last century. And then he was also the founder of the company Lenz Moser, the biggest wine house of Austria in terms of volume they sold. It is a wine merchant, and I think they sell around 20 million bottles nowadays. And the winery was held by my uncle, while as my father was responsible for the family vineyards. And the grapes were all processed in the cellar of my uncle and finally marketed as Lenz Moser wines.
Okay.
And as my uncle got in financial problems, the winery had to be sold mid of the 80s of the last century. And my father suddenly was standing alone with the vineyards. The best times it was more than 100 hectares, and it was a completely new situation where my father thought either stop and do something completely new and something else, or to restart his own thing in wine, and that's what he did finally, and fortunately, I have to say, and that we founded the company, the estate, Weingut Sepp Moser, with vintage 1987.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he had this opportunity really to start things with the vineyard. Did he fundamentally have a different sort of idea of what he wanted to establish the Sepp Moser brand of the Weingut around, or was it he was going to do the same thing, or what was his idea?
Finally, he was pretty happy to be independent, completely independent from his brother. And from that kind of philosophy the former company had, because the wines were mostly sold in supermarkets, and it was good quality but still mass production. And the idea of my father was to have the focus more on the fantastic vineyard sites that we have here, mostly here in the ROHRENDORF, as well as in the vineyards that we ran in the Neusiedlers area. And his idea was from the beginning of the Sepp Moser winery to start to establish highest possible quality from the fantastic vineyard sites that we have. And he also decided to reduce the surface of vineyards a lot, from more than 100 hectares to 30 hectares.
But maybe go back to those early times. Did you enjoy the life that you as a child was growing up in terms of being around wine, being in vineyards, and maybe take us through your sort of progression?
On one hand, we were connected with wine quite early when we were teenagers, because my father and his friends, they tasted a lot, and we were involved quite early, and we were invited to taste the different wines as well to distinguish between the varieties, and so that was interesting for us. But on the other hand, I wasn't so much interested in going into my father's footsteps in earlier times when he was still connected with a big structure, because that wasn't my thing, to be part in a wine merchant company. So what I always wanted to be is to be in touch with the soil. And before the new structure, that wasn't the case. So I wasn't interested to go in my father's footsteps.
At what age did you start to feel that maybe there was a different way of doing things than what you were either, accustomed to, or seeing what was happening around the industry? So what age did you start to really think, look, this is, if I'm going to do this, maybe I've got to do things in a slightly different way?
So it was just around the time when my father started his new thing, when I got interested into that. Because just a year before, I started at the BOKU, at the Agricultural University in Vienna, to start studying enology. Ecology. Sorry, in ecology. Because that was always something that I was interested in. But finally, I decided that I'm not the born student, so I quit my studies there, and I was thinking about something new, either study or starting to work immediately. And that was exactly the time when my father started his estate under his name. And that was also the time when the viticultural school in Krems started with a new college. It was called wine management. That was my start. In the beginning, I wasn't very sure about it. And the longer I got into it, the more sure I was about a new possible path for me. Yeah.
What was the sort of the evolution past that point in terms of making wine?
Before I was studying wine management, I wasn't really connected with the wine. I was doing, I spent a few weeks during summer holidays working outside in the vineyards, but it was just to earn some money to go to Greece afterwards or something. I wasn't really interested in that. But that changed a lot when I began to do my studies in wine management. So I really had a look what I could do during my traineeship. And then I was more and more interested also in the organic part already. So I started to have a look at organic producers at the time, which was very rare in beginning 90s. And then after I finished the wine management college, I had to do a traineeship somewhere. And I decided to go to France, and it was still not in an organic, in two estates. One was in Burgundy and then one in Bordeaux. But I already had an eye on it. And the decision to go in the organic and biodynamic way was taken later.
Mm-hmm. And were you sort of discussing this with your father, Sepp? How did things become a reality in terms of a sort of a change in direction for the Sepp Moser winery?
On one hand, my father was a very open guy.
Yeah.
He's vintage 1929, so he was born in the period of time when they still delivered the wine with ox carriages. That's true. And then there was the technological revolution in the vineyards as well as in the wine cellar. And my father went with it with enthusiasm, really. And when there was, new presses coming and industrial yeast and enzymes and these things, my father was really... He was very convinced about that and introduced all these things in the wine cellar and everything, and also the treatments of the vineyards was very conventional. It was like that with all the things, herbicides and the synthetic sprayings and so on, and that was the development in those times. And of course, my father was not very pleased when I said somewhere in the 90s that I would be interested to go in the organic direction. So, what's that for? And there's everything we developed in the last decades was so perfect, and the wines got better everywhere. That's true. And why should we go somewhere back, so to say, into the organic direction? That didn't make sense at all. And I said to my father, but I'm interested. I'm very much interested to go in that direction. And he was a little patriarch. He said, as long as I'm the boss, no way.
It's fair enough.
But when you've taken over, you can do whatever you want.
Okay, right. Yeah, it was a happy compromise. So I just want to get a bit of an idea of the point just before the big decision was made, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So maybe what were your thoughts around that time of what was happening in the industry?
I remember that in this time Austria began to gain interest in the wine world, in the international wine world. Although we are only producing around 1% of the world wine production, people began to discover Austrian wine. So some estates began to export to the States and to other European countries, even to Japan and so. And but in the same time, it was the high time for candy fruit in the white wines, and the red wines became to be very American style, and the organic guys in Austria who already existed at the time, very few ones, and they were seen as completely foolish and the hippie guys and so and it was funny to see. And nobody or very few people understood that somebody could be interested to produce a wine in the organic way and something like fermenting spontaneously. It was absolutely crazy.
I think now we're getting to the point where you've been sort of put in charge of the winery, and you start to really decide on taking the winery in a different direction. With Biodynamic, and I think I remember you telling me this story, or maybe there was that story and some other ones of really what turned things for you completely in terms of what really made you decide that yes, this really is the direction that I want to go down. Was it sort of one particular thing, or was it just a slow build up of just being more and more sure that this was the direction, or were there any particular instances where you saw for a fact that biodynamic philosophy is the way to go?
So first thing was that I always wanted to go in the organic direction. So already in the late 90s, I went and visited some organic producers here in the region. And to be honest, I was a little bit disappointed because I asked them, so tell me a little bit how you're working. And some of them said, that's easy. We, instead of using synthetic sprayings and herbicides, we use copper and sulfur, and then we look what's coming out of it. And if we're lucky, we have good yield and good quality. And, that was not at all the idea my father had and gave over to me to produce high quality wine with a lot of personality. And I couldn't accept this philosophy. We'll see what comes out, and because we wanted to live from what we do, and we wanted to have a certain security. And then in winter 98, 99, there was a lecture of Marc Kreidenweis in Eisenstadt, Burgenland at the time. I don't know why they invited him, but because nobody knew about biodynamics. But he held this lecture about biodynamic viticulture. And the people were sitting in the audience with open mouths. And, I saw these things a little bit as too esoteric, cow horns. The first time I got in contact with cow horns and you stuff cow manure into the horns, and that sounded very spooky to me. But on the other hand, I was impressed by the different way of thinking, not using, what was usual at the time and still is now. There's a lot. You got a certain problem in agriculture, and there's a product against the disease, and you use it, and that's it. It's nothing else than fighting symptoms. So I was impressed by the idea of building up health balance in agriculture, viticulture. So I got interested. So we said in May 99 that we'll do an excursion to Alsace to go and see some of these crazy guys. And we went to visit Marc Kreidenweis in Alsace, and also another big pioneer of Demeter viticulture, Jean-Pierre Frick. And so we called them and said, we are Austrian wine growers. We would be interested in biodynamic viticulture. Could we come and see a little bit how that works? No problem, and that is fantastic, because that's a part of the philosophy of biodynamic producers all over the world, I think. Open doors for those who are interested. And that's what we experienced there. We came there and we spent hours in both of these estates. So we went out to the vineyards. We were invited to taste from the barrels, and then we sat down in the tasting room, tasted another few wines, and we were explained everything we wanted to know. It was fantastic. And one of the key experiences we had there, it was the key experience I had, was we were standing outside in the. And you have to know that 99 was an extremely difficult vintage in Alsace, where all the leaves already in May were brown because of mildew. And these two guys, Jean-Pierre and Marc, they had the most beautiful vineyards in the whole surroundings. It was really impressive. So, and I still see it as it was yesterday. Andrea and myself standing in the vineyard of Jean-Pierre Frick and looking at each other, saying, we think that's our way. It was really, it was really a decision taken from the stomach. A gut decision. Is that the right expression in English? A gut decision. Wow. And then I took over from my father with the year 2000. And we started immediately with one trial vineyard in the beginning, 2.5 hectares, and the most difficult vineyard site. It was Wolfsgraben, where we always had big problems with powdery mildew. And we said, when it's working there, it's working everywhere. And when I look back, it was very, we did a lot of mistakes, of course, in the first years. Yeah. And I really have to laugh when I see us walking with the back sprayer, and so. But we had to start somewhere, and from year to year we expanded the biodynamic trial surface, also then to the second vineyard, the Neusiedlersee, with 2001, 2002 we expanded more, and finally 2005 we had 17 hectares under biodynamic viticulture, and the rest still conventional. And then we reached the point where we said no longer conventional, so we signed up for Demeter in 2005, autumn 2005.
Okay, and maybe now it's a good point for maybe people who don't understand what biodynamic viticulture is about, and not to get into too much detail, but how would you sort of sum up what the biodynamic philosophy is about, and maybe some of the sort of the key practices applied in the vineyard, and maybe even through the production process?
So the most important idea about biodynamics, with the ideas that were given initially by Rudolf Steiner in 1924 at the Landwirtschaftlicher Kurs, agricultural lectures, was that a good farm should be in a circle. That means a good farm should be having crops like vineyards, orchards, also crops like wheat and everything, but also animals. So the dung of the animals should be feeding the fields, but also you should be producing the grass and the food for your animals yourself. So everything should be as much as possible in a circle. So with the measures that we have, to go as much as possible in this direction to get back into a circle. So an important thing is to reintroduce some animals, maybe some other cultures, to allow other things around your vineyards, not only the vineyards for themselves as a monoculture, but to plant trees, to seed out cover crops, manifold cover crops with a big biodiversity. So in biodynamic agriculture, the farmer is on the search for balance. We are not trying to only fight the symptoms, but also build up health. That starts with the soil, of course. If you're working on a good soil with a good soil life, that's a good and important basis. So we're working a lot on the soil and soil fertility, and also with the biodynamic preparations that we use. It's the most important biodynamic preparations that we use is horn manure and horn silicate. It was an advice of Rudolf Steiner, also agricultural course in 1924, to produce a preparation which is not used as a normal fertilizer, but an impulse to the soil, like horn manure. This is cow horns stuffed with cow manure and buried in the ground over wintertime, and composted in the horn over wintertime. So the idea is to capture the earth fertility, which is going back into the soil during wintertime, and helping to compost the manure very gently, and capturing these life forces in the earth, and finally taking it out in springtime, using this composted earth compost, and stir it in water, using the water as a transmitter to the soil, and dropwise onto your soils, and using it as an impulse, as an example for your soils. If you have a look at that horn manure, composted, perfect horn manure, it's like a forest earth, forest soil, and it's smelling fantastic. It's you smell fertility. So we're stirring this horn manure, this compost, this very special kind of compost, in warm water, and spray it out dropwise onto the soils to give the example and to support soil life. And that's proven that works perfectly in the long run to build up an enormous balance in the soil. And the second preparation that we use, I think, in viticulture, very important, is horn silicate. This is grinded, very fine grained. It's like flour, very fine grained quartz crystal, also stuffed into cow horn and buried over summertime for about half a year. And the idea is to capture light and warmth forces with these crystals. That's something that is capturing the light forces. The light it is possible with the quartz to give an impulse of life and warmth to the plant, and that is a preparation which is sprayed directly onto the plant. And then there is also some preparations for the compost we're using, also in very little doses, used more or less as a homeopathic impulse to the compost. Everything focused on the balance. And we've done trials to have a compost with and without biodynamic preparations in the compost, and really impressive difference you see there.
What you've been talking about is very much so far been entrenched in the agricultural side, the soil and the plants and what's happening in the vineyard. How do you see yourself as being part of this system, as part of this supporting what is happening through the processes and practices?
I think it's very important that human aspect is very important. A good farm is not only shouldn't be only a circle with the different crops you have and with the animals, but also a very important factor, of course, is human beings, the farmer, and especially I would say for wine, the human influence is very important because wine is an agricultural product that shows the impact of the farmer, of the wine grower, like no other agricultural product shows the impact of the farmer. And so the biodynamic philosophy also includes the idea of interfering as little as possible into the final product. That means fermentations and aging of the wines are done with as little as possible of interference. Because our idea is, and that's the idea of many winemakers, they all talk about terroir, is to show as much as possible individuality, regionality, terroir in the wines. And of course it's the influence of the wine grower himself, but it's not in a way that we use this or that product, but to interfere at the right point. So we are tasting a lot in the cellar. That starts in the vineyard. I try to think for myself, with my experience, with my gut decisions, when to interfere, when should I plow, when should I do my treatments, when should I do canopy management and all these things. And the same in the cellar. We try not to rely on analysis regarding racking, pressing, findings and these things. Anyway, we try to do as little as possible. But when we interfere in the cellar, we try to take the decision when to do it just on ourselves, and with tasting and finding the right point to do that. Because I think wine is like a living being. So the wine is doing big fluctuations in the cellar, and it's also depending a lot on moon and planets, circles, and so far. We don't know so much about how these connections are, but we can see it with our palate, the different states of the wines it is going through. And finally, we try to find out For example, before pressing the red wines from the skins, we try to find the right point. Before sulfuring, anyway, as little as possible, but when to sulfur as late as possible, and to find it the right point. Because when you sulfur a wine at the point where it's very closed, it will be closed for a very long time, or it will never be showing its true character, because the sulfur is something which is capturing the character of a wine up to a certain point. So all these things are playing together in our work, and I think the interesting thing about the idea of biodynamic is not only to work in an environmentally friendly way, it's not only to produce maybe higher quality. I'm very convinced that individuality of the wine is growing. It's possible to produce very individual wines with biodynamics, but also it's more independence from the big chemical companies and from the wine laboratories. It's a nice feeling to be saying, okay, I'm doing the things just as I want to do them, and I'm not forced to have nobody behind me saying, so now you have to do this or now you have to do that. And that's an interesting idea. That's more responsibility for yourself, but also that's more freedom. And that's something I like very much about the idea of biodynamics.
I mean, it brings me to a question, sort of branching out more into the wine industry as we see it. How do you see this philosophy and the resultant wine, be it your wine or be it other biodynamic wines? How is that sitting currently within the world of wine?
I think there are two main directions. The one is the industrial direction, is huge, and the other is the organic direction. For my opinion, everything which is in between is dying out. If you are not able as a wine producer or other farmer, whatever you produce, to find your own profile, you will die. Even as a crop farmer, you have to find your certain special products. You have to be your individuality somehow. Otherwise, either you're trapped in the industrial way. You have to grow and produce very cheaply. Otherwise,
you can't compete.
You can't compete, or you decide to produce special things with more individuality, and therefore find your own market and people who are more and more also hungry to find these special things. That was maybe also the chance for Austria as a little country, as a tiny agricultural country, but we have still very many special things to offer on the wine side, but also on other things. And I think there's a good chance for organic producers of any kind. Anyway, we wouldn't survive in the industrial way in Austria, in all agricultural purpose.
What are the things that you are keeping you sort of interested in? I mean, not only what you're doing within Sepp Moser and the vineyards, but I mean generally.
There are several things that I'm interested in. One big thing for me is homeopathic treatments in the vineyard as well as in the cellar. I'm very much convinced that there's such a wide field that could be experienced, and I'm doing my trials. Also, some other producers do that, and that is a part of the future, for my opinion. Also, the idea of making our estate more round, in the sense of bringing more animals in. We just opened our organic shop on the estate. There will be a little restaurant part in future. only tiny, but to have more feed into different sections. As a Demeter producer, and also I'm a member of the board, Demeter board in Austria. I got to know so many fantastic producers of little artisanal producers who have fantastic products, but they can't manage to sell it well. So many of them are, unfortunately, they're poor people with a lot of idealism, but poor farmers. And I think it's a shame. And it's important to show the people the difference on the palate. I think it is the easiest thing is to trap the clients, the consumers, with the taste, with what they taste. And if they're experienced consumers, gourmets, we have a lot of people who spend a lot of money on fine food things and rather expensive wines in restaurants and so. And they're experienced tasters. And it's funny and nice to see how the people see the difference between even industrial organic things from supermarkets and biodynamic things, simple things like potatoes or apples or vegetables from the farmers, from biodynamic farmers. These are real eye-openers. So, of course, it's another, will be in a future other part of our business, still very small, but also it is a nice idea to be kind of ambassadors.
What do you try to sort of bring to the product and what you do as a way to connect to people, consumers, customers and stuff? What is the big sort of driving force internally for you to do the sorts of things that you're doing?
Big advantage of being a wine grower, a vintner, is that you have to be very diverse in all the things you're doing. So you have to be, you should know your vines, you should know the soil, you should be enologist, and if it is a rather smaller estate or family estate, you should be knowing your clients as well. And if none of these things is exaggerated, you manage to find a good balance between these parts. It's fantastic. It's so nice to see that the people who are buying our wines, many of them are really friends, became friends. We saw with the time that the style of wines that we are producing gets you in connection with a certain type of nice people.
To what point are you trying to distinguish yourself within the family history and the legacy of Sepp Moser? I mean, the brand, the name of the winery and the name of the wine is Sepp Moser, and so that represents this heritage. You're Niki Moser, you carry the surname. Do you ever think about sort of to what point the label, the wine, needs to represent your name, your individual name and your individual philosophy? How do you balance having something that is historically linked to you being someone that is obviously contemporary, living and managing things now?
That's true. It was, and it still is a bit of a problem that we're sometimes confounded with the other big Moser, where the wines are to be found in supermarkets. But it's getting better and better. So that's good. When we took over from my father, we were, of course, thinking of changing the name. But my father was the guy who built up the new structure, was responsible for the good image which was built up within close to 2 decades. And finally, I thought it wouldn't be a good idea to start with a new name again, with my name again. And then we have good luck that 2 of our daughters are getting into our footsteps now. They would have the same problems that I have.
Do you know which way they would?
No.
You haven't had the discussion.
Yeah. So it seems that it will stay with with the name Sepp Moser. Of course, Moser is our surname. We'll never try to get rid of that on the label.
Yeah.
Because I think it's our thing. It's our family thing. So, and maybe at one point the Sepp will be changed somehow. I don't know, but it's not on the plan at the moment. Yeah.
And so, talking about your wines, could you give us a bit of a snapshot in terms of what the cellar list looks like currently, and also some of the new directions, or maybe some of the new things that you're trying to develop down the line?
So we have the vineyards in 2 different regions of Austria. We live here in the Kremstal region, Low Austria, about 70 kilometers in the west of Vienna. A true white wine region with a focus on Veltliner and Riesling and so. And the second vineyard is in the southeast of Vienna, very close to the Hungarian border, wine region Neusiedlersee, with a big focus on red wines and the main variety Zweigelt. Most of the range is still very traditional, I would say. And that's also something I want to keep, is the very traditional way. Maybe the style of wine they had in Austria in former decades before, let's say before 1970 or so, before the introduction of industrial yeast and all these things. But with the focus on highest possible quality, and also with the old traditional single vineyard philosophy, which is very old in this region. We have vineyards dating back to with names dating back to the 13th century. So we really want to keep and support this tradition. So what we have is a range of very traditional style village wines, single vineyard wines of the 2 regions, reserve wines in the Neusiedlersee area, but also more and more so-called natural style is gaining more and more space in our range of wines. At the moment we have 4 wines which are existing of nothing else than grapes. That means no filtering, no fining, no sulfur, which is an idea that I'm quite fascinated about it. Because, in viticultural school, you learn what you need to produce wine. You have to add certain products, enzymes, industrial yeast, and these findings, and dozens of different things. But they don't tell you in the school that you finally don't need anything to produce wine. You need a press and you need something to ferment your juice in it. And that's really fascinating, because I think that's a way to express really not only the region, but also your personality. Terroir is the 3 things is climate, soil and personality, and that's the way that really expresses personality a lot. But not everybody is open for a so-called natural style, so most of the part is still very traditional, also with the idea to interfere as little as possible. And the aim is to, for example, sulfur is very low in our wines, and all the wines that are fermented and or aged in wooden barrels, either barrique or big barrels, are unfiltered. So the main focus is on what comes in from the vineyards.
And as a consumer, someone who maybe isn't in tune with biodynamic wines, how would they not so much tell the difference, but what are some of the essential aspects of a wine? I mean, how would you describe the subtle differences that this philosophy, this biodynamic philosophy, would result in when someone is actually drinking that, compared to something that's conventionally made?
I can tell you what we are aiming for, and I'm not only talking about biodynamic wines. I think good wines, interesting wines, are never jumping out of the glass. When you pour into the glass, and good wines, it's the same like with humans. They're not showing everything they have from the first glance. And we don't like screaming people, and as we don't like screaming wines, sometimes our wines are really slow wines. That means they take a little time to open up in a glass, but with every sip, every sniff into the glass, you can experience something new. That's something which interests me a lot. And I think you could also explain good biodynamic wines in that way. You can't expect a lot of primary fruit, a lot of oaky vanilla taste at first glance. But if you take your time, sit down, let the wine get some temperature, some air, you will discover more and more. And that's something I would say good wines are about. I'm not aiming for wines that need a lot of explaining, because many of our wines are enjoyed in high-class restaurants and so there's not always a guy behind the wine, a sommelier or somebody who is able to explain the wine. So our wine should be allowing somebody just to pour, to enjoy. But when you see our labels, it's very traditional style labels. They wouldn't expect a screaming wine anyway, and so that is also something which is talking to the consumer. Let's say when we go back 15 years or so, it was the high time of candy fruit. There were many people disappointed when they came in here and they tasted our spontaneously fermented wines, which always need a little bit of time to open up in a glass. They said, this wine doesn't have a lot of fruit. What is it's not a true Connevelina. And they said, take it out. This is the real, I dare to say that's the real type of Connevelina, because the candy fruit is coming out with cold fermentation with industrial yeast. But many people at that period didn't understand that so well. Nowadays it's different, because the people are fed up with candy fruit and jammy red wines. So it's getting much better, and the people are really partially coming in because they're searching for a style like we produce it. And we, in most of the cases, we have very good feedback from the people also regarding what the wines does with themselves. So headache and these things. And just yesterday we were sitting with friends until 11 p.m. and a friend came back to the shop today and said, we drank something yesterday, but I feel so well today. It's so nice.
Yeah. So are you seeing maybe over the years that people are really wanting to get back in connection with what they're drinking, what they're eating, how things are made, if they're made well, even the people who are producing it or making it, so that at the end of the day they get a better experience from what they're doing, as opposed to just going into a supermarket or getting something that's already packaged that they don't know where it's come from. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing maybe something that's happening in that area?
Absolutely. Still, it's a small part of the consumers that are going that direction, but a strongly growing part, from my opinion. And that's one little positive thing of the crisis now, the COVID crisis, that the people were more or less forced to stay at home, and they had the time to look a little bit around what's produced here. There's a farmer here, what I can buy there, and so. And for many people, it was the chance to discover the producers, the farmers around, and their products. And it was also nice to see it here in the shop. Even many local people were coming that we didn't expect them so much to come, the people of the village. And they said, the bread that you can buy here, it tastes like it was tasting when I was young. And the people are starting to think what they are eating and drinking, and maybe how the animals are treated, where they get the meat from, and so. And I think it's a good direction, but it could be more supported. I think education of the people, of the consumer, is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on that note, we'll wrap that up, Niki.
Okay.
Thanks for the discussion. And
thanks very much. It was my pleasure.
I really appreciate it.
Okay,
yeah.
good.
I think it's now time for a drink.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Niki Moser. I will leave a link to his winery and cellar door in the description below. If you get a chance to visit his cellar, it's really a wonderful experience. And if you like today's podcast, don't forget to subscribe, and that way you'll keep in contact with new content as it comes on live. And if you also liked it, don't forget to give it a like and a thumbs up, and also share some comments in the comments below, and I'll certainly get back to you. So until next time, thanks for listening.